There is no way we should have flown across the country to buy this highly modified Ranwin Parked relic sight unseen off of Craigslist. No way we should have spent a few days fixing it up in the seller's side yard and leaving on a cross-country road trip without a follow car or backup plan. And no way we should have actually made it home after thousands of miles of overheating while parts ejected themselves from this king of clunkers at every turn. But damn it if we didn't win the survival lottery and somehow pull this heap into my driveway under its own power. The poor 1980 Thunderbird V8 that had been swapped into the car 20 years prior had all but given up, and the last time it started was running worse than it had all the way back in Arizona that first night on the road. We always assumed that a blown head gasket or similar leak could be to blame, but the symptoms were consistently inconsistent and it was never quite clear what effect, if any, the K-seal we poured into the radiator had on our successes and failures. After staring at the car in the driveway for a month, I had gotten it in my head that the abused 302 deserved one last fair shot. And it seemed reasonable to start by fixing some of the car's many small problems that may or may not have been contributing to the larger overheating predicament. The one part that everyone in the comments section and even parts reps reaching out with sponsorship offers said was obviously at fault is the radiator. It's a cross-flow conversion dealie meant for swapping a 302 into a first-gen Mustang. So even if it is on the small side, it shouldn't be catastrophically undersized. But I was pretty sure we could fit a wider one, so from a hotel room in Greenville, Alabama, before even getting the Pinto back home, I had ordered a new one. There are also even wider models out there for the Mustang too, but road trip delusional me didn't do enough research, so here we are with the runner-up. Either way, I was convinced that the design of the old radiator wasn't at fault, but the contents of it might be. That's not dirt, that's from it pressing down and closing on the debris around that edge. That's very interesting. No matter how many times we flushed the system or what we flushed it with, the coolant always seemed to end up dirty before too long, and the current state is no exception. So either it's still loaded up with an impressive amount of crud, or, an option I am desperately trying to will out of the realm of possibility, there is a combustion chamber leak letting carbon and whatever else travel into the cooling system. A chemical leak test may have been telling, but I didn't have any on hand and was still enjoying what little denial I could cling to. After disconnecting the battery, you can tell this is ground because it's red. We'll dig out the excellent rad fan wiring. This is something we repaired in that gas station in Texas when I couldn't find the crimp connectors, so that wire is actually just taped together, which got the job done. Then we'll cut loose the transcooler, remove 4 bolts, and the rad is free. And yeah, there's still visible RTV and detritus stuck in the tubes, but that's far from the only issue on my mind. Right now, the alternator's on this bracket, which has 3 half-inch nuts behind it spacing it out, and that's the only thing holding the alternator, and the other side is just kind of floating. The crank pulley wobbles. You can see it's not registered on the hub of the crankshaft. I believe that's why this thing keeps shredding belts. This is, I think, the 3rd belt I put on here. It's not good for bearings, it's not good for the belt, it's not really helping anyone. And it looks like all the pulleys are spaced forward equal amounts. Presumably because the old water pump was longer, but now it seems completely unnecessary. While we're snooping around, let's point out the mismatched bolts we used to hold on the water pump pulley, the 2 missing engine mount bolts, and a 3rd that is free spinning. The nut is rusted on there, so it's been like that for quite a while. And the vestigial vapor canister that hasn't been hooked up in 20 plus years. I also spotted this warranty tab up there. The center of the donut melts to indicate that an engine has been overheated, and unsurprisingly, this one is cleared out like the bar when I go up for karaoke. Focus. Yes, the cooling system. To help ensure that we're working with a clean-ish slate, we'll pull the block drain plugs to empty out the remaining coolant, and just for the heck of it, we'll swap the rear intake coolant plug for a garden hose fitting. And voila, the world's most flushed engine is once again spraying water all over the place. It's cleaning off that frame rail really well. I don't know how much of that came off of the body of the car versus how much of that came out of the engine, but it sure ain't clear. After running a bit more water and misjudging the splash zone, there is a mild surprise waiting for us.
That's interesting. Sure looks like soap suds coming out of there.
Turns out it's harder to get dish soap out of the system than it may seem. Eventually, the water runs clear, and we should have the cleanest 302 this side of the hot tank.
Next thing I really want to do before taking more apart is a compression test. I'm going to pull all the spark plugs out. They all look the same, which is good. A few of them have hints of speckling, like detonation was happening.
We'll disconnect the mummified ignition coil, hold open the throttle, and install the tester.
Cylinder number 1. Boy, that starter sounds bad though, huh?
Despite the screeching, the numbers were looking normal. Until...
Cylinder number 8. Uh-oh.
108 psi certainly stands out, but let's see if a direct injection of oil bumps that number. On the next test it sure did, but then it ran out of steam on the way up. Multiple runs after that read normally though, so
Maybe a ring was stuck? I don't know.
worth a look with the inspection camera.
There's the cylinder head. There's no ring ridge at all. Yeah, I don't see anything bad in there.
It mostly just looks like carbon and oil. My attempt at a leak down test stalled out due to air hose issues, and since I felt like I hadn't learned anything concrete from the compression test, I wasn't ready to commit to a full engine teardown. But there is a lot of cleanup work I'd like to do, and maybe, just maybe, improvements to the jankiest parts of the fuel and ignition systems will do this tired hunk of iron some good. The electrical system in particular is still pretty iffy, including all the tape we put over disintegrating insulation, and frankly, I'm impressed that any of this worked at all.
That wire is barely connected. Somebody has repaired that in the past. It's a lot of stuff like that.
And don't even get me started on how nice and clean all of the connectors are.
Don't seem to have any kind of weather sealing. There's supposed to be clips holding them on, but every single one is already broken off. Every single one.
The more I saw, the more I was convinced that the poor little car deserved some proper attention, not just rushed roadside fixes.
Come on, diff fluid back here too.
We'll get it situated in the garage for the first time, like laying a patient down on an operating table, and immediately get to some reconstructive surgery. I maybe got a little carried away with buying parts for this thing, but let's start simple. I had repeatedly found myself wishing, quite desperately at times, that the windshield had 2 wipers. But finding a Pinto arm to replace the broken one wasn't gonna happen, so I had to find something similar, and a Fox Body Mustang arm looked pretty dang close. Fortunately, they dropped right on and locked down without any problems.
Oh no, it's raining. Yay! Oh god, that sounds so bad.
I think it just needs 14 volts to do this. Oh, you just had to decrease the drag.
Oh god, it's raining.
Works pretty good. I also decided to lose the antenna since there's no radio in there anyway, and once we have the car up on jack stands, the hood will return to its ever-familiar home away from home. Underneath, however, there was an unexpected surprise.
In Texas, after working on the leaf springs, I managed to lose a 3/4 inch socket. I think I just found it. It's not jammed on or anything, it's just sitting on there. That made it, 1,400 miles? That's pretty wild.
Especially since over that same drive, it rattled loose another collector bolt. The Pinto giveth and the Pinto taketh away. Once the passenger side exhaust is off, it's clear that that missing fastener caused a significant leak. Only perhaps eclipsed by the driver's side thanks to that muffler's wild ride. Impressively, the bolts were still snug and the nylock nuts stood up to the heat. Despite my best efforts, however, the exhaust did hang on to some souvenirs.
Definitely at least one rock in there.
In fact, it brought home a bounty.
This is how you tune your carburetor. Dump out the carbon collector rocks, and if they're thoroughly coated like this, it might be a little bit rich.
I also gave the hammer a chance to straighten out the collector flange,
And in the process, knocked loose even more rocks. This is just one giant chunk, not at all dissimilar to peanut brittle and will probably break your teeth just as bad. That's something I have not seen before, but you know, you don't normally have a lot of rocks in your muffler behind your very poorly tuned engine.
Equally unusual, I hope, is the duct tape holding up the battery positive cable.
This is where that road debris messed the cable up.
An event that validated my dislike for the underslung cable, which I desperately want to relocate. I considered entirely eliminating the long run of wire by fitting the battery back in the engine bay, and even went as far as to remove the windshield washer reservoir and coolant overflow tank, which was as gross inside as you'd expect. After some farther experimenting, I decided to come back to that conundrum later and face some of the other distractions staring me in the face. The free-floating brake combination valve was always a big discomfort, so let's do a little line rearranging and get that properly bolted down.
That did it.
Some of the brake lines are still getting real friendly with the exhaust heat, but believe it or not, they are better than they were before. At the very front of the car, I noticed that one of the 4 bumper mounting bolts was missing, and the other 3 were loose.
You just need to tighten every bolt on this freaking thing. They probably took this bumper off to get the engine crane in here, and the bumper is all the way down as far as it'll go.
Which explains the huge gap.
Set the bumper 1 roll of electrical tape from the fender on each side.
Whether considering them aesthetically or functionally offensive, I was finding things I didn't like absolutely anywhere I looked.
Wire for the fan relay is just sandwiched in there.
And decluttering the engine bay by removing unnecessary parts, like the starter solenoid, felt so good that I just couldn't stop myself. The junky wiring has been a thorn in my side since I first laid eyes on this old beaut, between the disintegrating insulation begging to start a fire, and simply the mass of loose strands and connectors I was dying to remove. So now seems like as good a time as any to start mapping out everything in there and stripping it down to the essentials, which meant extracting a lot of crispy rainbow spaghetti. I even decided to give the patchy, multicolored engine bay a half-assed, or maybe third-assed, paint job while things were out of the way. Satin black seemed like an appropriate choice, good for hiding all sorts of less than elegant sharp edges and stains. Once dry, it's back to playing electrician, and although I later regretted it, the washer fluid tank did end up relocated. I worked my way through the wiring loom from there, mounting a positive terminal stud, the coolant overflow, and a combination fuse and relay box. To crimp some of the heavier cables, I used the bench vise and a ball bearing, I think from a spray paint can, which made for a very solid connection. Not at all unlike the paint, I was winging the wiring job to a somewhat irresponsible degree, but I did at least make notes of wire colors for when I have to fix something later. Okay, well that was miserable, but here's the fuse and relay box.
It's actually really simple, it's just kind of messy.
The choke and rad fan will only come on when the engine is running thanks to the alternator field circuit. We've got new wires to run to the gauges and 12-volt outlet inside the car, and an extra relay for extra lights that we may or may not add later.
I guess the last question is, will this work? I think so.
That'll get mounted up for real, and we'll start integrating it into the main wiring loom. But before we get too far along, we'll need some other components in position, starting with the radiator. And in order to mount it as far back as possible, the flat bars bracing the core support will have to go. After a turf war with the grille and hood, it seems like we've reached a tenuous truce. Some half-inch steel tubing will go under the saw, and after some filing of the radiator's mounting holes, we can actually bolt it into the car.
It's about the clearance I was looking for. Once the pulley spacers are off, should be able to get a belt on that. Sling's down pretty low. Might just be how the factory ones were though. There's just no lower valence covering it. Okay, but does the hood still fit? It does not.
So the poor, much abused thing is going to undergo even more trimming. With those extra chunks out of the way and some fine tuning of the radiator's location,
hey,
it is just a breath away from knocking off the Ford emblem, but the cap isn't touching anymore, so we'll be calling that good. Looking at the remaining space in the engine bay, I finally gave up on relocating the battery, so we should probably figure out how to safely transmit power from the rear. The most obvious way to keep the conductors safe from road debris is to run them inside.
Under this panel, there's a channel here big enough for the positive battery cable.
Sounds like we've got a plan brewing, but there's always time for getting sidetracked, and that's exactly what happened when I was sleuthing around.
It's when the reverse lights don't work, there's no f***ing bulb in there.
I have a plan to illuminate them, and putting bulbs in does seem like a good place to start. Back on the battery track, we'll remove the not at all misleading red ground connection and feed the black positive cable down through the floor. Despite appearances, the T-Rex tape did have a very firm grasp on it.
That might have been more solid than some of the zip ties were.
But eventually that long cable can be dragged out.
Just notice this, even the securing bolts for the cable are loose.
We can also take our first good look at where the metal chunk hit, and while the strands are mostly intact, there is a lot of insulation missing, so we were real lucky it didn't find something to short out against. This is exactly the kind of freak accident we're hoping to avoid by rerouting the cable.
Here's a fun game to play. What's under the rear seats of a 1980 Pinto? I don't think anything good. Well, there's an Allen key, a penny, some kind of earring, bracelet, dime, a comb, a hair clip, more pennies, old house key or something. Oh god, is that a locket? Oh no. I know the question on everyone's mind. What's in this nasty locket? Just more corrosion.
All of that was in service of taking a peek under this side panel, which turns out to be hiding the perfect thoroughfare for our needs.
One panel I don't have to fight to take off is this kick panel. That was falling off the whole trip.
And then off comes the sill plate as the last piece of the puzzle.
This is some kind of door panel cardboard or something. That's just duct tape.
We'll be using this box that came with the car to mount and contain the battery, and to help it sit flat, this spare tire hold-down strap is going to have to go. We'll cut out a piece of aluminum plate to block off the big hole in the floor, then drill for a pair of battery hold-down studs, being very careful not to puncture the infamous gas tank hiding right underneath. Another pair of holes will act as the ground cable pass-through and a vent to outside air. We'll make a pair of new ground cables, running one down to this channel and one to the trunk floor for redundancy. Back at the front of the car, we'll drill a firewall pass-through for the 15 feet of 1/0 welding cable that I'm praying is going to be long enough. With the front end crimped, we'll feed the cable through the firewall, lock it down to the terminal, and go through the not at all arduous process of snaking the wire through its maze of sheet metal. The scheme worked though, even with the cable cocooned in 1 to 2 layers of split loom, and the 15-foot length turned out to be precisely enough. That's a big relief. And we'll celebrate with another side project. The previous owner never had keys for the car, but allowed the hatch to work with ye old master key by knocking out the pins in the lock cylinder. I lucked into a new old stock Pinto set from eBay, and we already have good access thanks to the removed trim panels, so how hard could it be to swap that out? This screw secures a sheet metal retaining bar, and with that moved aside, the lock cylinder can be jiggled and popped right out of the panel. Straightforward enough.
It looks a little bit different, hopefully close enough. I think this is from a slightly earlier year Pinto.
Unwinding the spring releases the link rod, which transfers right over, but that's about the end of the good news.
It doesn't slot in. The top is just the tiniest bit too narrow. I think I'm just going to take a file to that and we'll see what happens. Aha!
But the longer cylinder leaves the link flapping in the breeze, and in order to clear the trim panel, it's going to have to be shaved down. The panel itself isn't escaping unharmed either, as my barely long enough battery cable is going to need a cutout. With everyone now getting along, we'll clip on and secure the retaining bar, meaning we can finally do a real test. Fortunately, the new key works, and the old one doesn't. With that small victory achieved, we'll put the final touches on our battery installation before taking it all back out.
All batteries should have handles, that sucks!
Inspired by the engine bay's glow up, I decided I wanted to take some time to mirror that back here, only with brush-on bed liner instead of spray paint. After a late night discovery that the fully open hatch doesn't clear the garage door,
Learned that lesson the hard way.
we'll give that a few coats over the next 24 hours. In the meantime, I'd like to ride the lock cylinder high and see if we can get to the ones in the doors that are also short a key. It would be real nice to be able to lock and, especially, unlock the car from the outside.
I also want to grease the heck out of the window mechanism because the driver's side one actually works pretty well, but the passenger side one is a real problem. You got to push on the window and help it along. Feels like something's gonna break.
So it'd be good to sort the window mechanisms out now and not after some irreplaceable part does fail. With a bit of patience and care, the door panel pops loose and we can see what we're working with. First up, the lock cylinder.
Similar to the hatch, these look just the tiniest bit different, but hopefully close enough that we can swap that in.
These are held in with spring clips that weren't exactly excited to move after all these years. Then the link can be popped out, and the whole thing wiggled free of the door.
The arm on this new one is a tiny bit longer. I don't know if that's going to be an issue or not. Also, just a random thing I noticed, the zigzag, the shape of the key, is reversed. That's a weird change.
It does drop into the door, the link bar pops in, and the spring clip does clip in. But
it's not a good feel.
And while the key does work to lock and unlock the door, bizarrely, there
doesn't appear to be any way to remove the key while the door is unlocked. Huh.
The obvious suspect is the arm, which is easy enough to remove, and as it turns out, is dissimilar in a surprising way.
The slot is actually totally different. This gives it some slack. Maybe that's the part it needs.
The cylinders themselves are a near perfect match, and the arm swaps over no problem.
Oh, that's way better. It is locked. Unlock it. There we go.
Now that we're all certified Pinto lock experts, how about that window?
It's a big jump for a very small amount of movement, and I think I see why. The whole mechanism is moving around. It's held in with 3 rivets, and what do you know? It is definitely loose. That would explain some things.
That's actually a big relief, because it should be a very solvable problem. A drill bit makes short work of the aluminum rivets, and a 1/2-inch long 1/4-inch bolt with a nylock nut is a perfect replacement. Once the other 2 rivets are unceremoniously torn apart and supplanted, it's
moment of truth time.
Presto changeo, it's like it just rolled off the dealership lot.
I'm really happy with how that worked out.
Once the moving parts have been doused with white lithium grease, it's time for the door panel.
It smells like the 70s, but it doesn't strike terror into me, so I will put this back on there.
Pretty soon, it's as if we did nothing at all, except...
Look at this. Now, we just gotta do the other side. There's your problem. This top rivet is totally gone, which saves me the effort of drilling it out, I guess.
Considering how much worse off this window was, that's not a big surprise. Once we replaced the 2 remaining rivets, the mechanism was solid, but the window still required a ton of grease to get it to move with relative ease. It seems like the rusty clock spring is still binding up a bit, but hopefully it loosens up more over time. Luckily, the lock cylinder swap was straightforward now that we know the trick to it. Then everything can go back together.
This door didn't improve quite as much as the other one when we gave it that window treatment, but it is definitely a heck of a lot better than it was.
One last detail is to replace the crank handles, since the plastic on both is cracked and they aren't fun to use. Replacements were very cheap, but of course didn't fit right because why would they? The new one won't tighten down because the central standoff is too short and the mounting screw bottoms out. One customized fastener later, the handle works fine and the only wobble is from the window mechanism itself. It's frustrating that nothing ever seems to fit right, but I'm looking forward to less palm scars in the future. Now, what was I supposed to be working on again? Oh right, yes, the engine. Should probably look at that sooner or later. But look how smooth that is.
Look at me opening the hatch with a key. Hello? Look at me opening the hatch with a key. I'm a modern man now. close. Maximum closeness.